So hi, this is Lou, welcome to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to be making a Valentine's card. So this is the design that I've made, and I've drawn this in pen, scanned it in, and then I've printed this out on just some very simple printer paper. And what I've done is, if you want to follow along with this, I have put this on the download section of my website, so that if you want to have a go at this, then you can print this out and follow along with me. So here I've also got a plain card blank and an envelope, and then I've cut out a piece of watercolour paper that's just a little bit smaller than my card. So this is actually 14.5 centimetres. I'm going to be working on the watercolour paper, and I just need to transfer the design. So I've printed this out, and you could use some carbon paper to transfer it, but all I'm going to do is I'm going to scribble on the back of this with some nice soft pencil. So now I've covered in the area where my heart is on the other side. Now I can line it up with my piece of watercolour paper and start to transfer the design. What I'm going to do is use a little bit of washi tape just to hold everything in place and stop it moving around. So let's get a piece on there, and then now I can see fairly well through this paper where my paper is underneath. If you have problems with that, then you could cut out around your heart and cut quite close to it so you can see a little bit of a border. I think that's quite good. So again, a little bit of washi tape to hold it in place. And now all I'm going to do is go over my design with a pen or a sharp pencil and transfer that pencil onto the paper that's underneath. So there we go. I've got all of the details in there that I want. I've not done the hearts around the outside of the little border because I think I can freehand those. But if you think it would be helpful to transfer them, then go ahead and do that. So I've transferred my design here, and most of it's fine, but there's a few places where the pencil is a little bit dark, and when I paint over the top of that, you'll see it through the watercolour. So I'm just going to go over the slightly dark areas and take away any really dark pencil and any smudges where my hand was on the paper. So now I've got my watercolours out, and I'm working out what kind of colours I want to use. So it's Valentine, so obviously some red and pinks would be quite nice. So I'm seeing what my palette has got, and your palette might have different things on. I've got a couple of pinks here. So this one is alizarin crimson. It's quite nice and rich. And then this one is permanent rose. It's very, very, very bright. It's like a fuchsia kind of colour. And I like that, but I also like when you mix a little bit of yellow into it and it becomes like a really kind of quite soft peach. And then I've got a really bright red here. And I like to just take this down a little bit by adding in a little bit of a reddish brown colour. So this is some burnt sienna I'm adding into it. And it just gives it a little bit more of an orange, and it takes it away from these pinks, so it just looks a little bit different. And then I need a couple of colours for contrast. So I'm using this warm yellow, which is a raw sienna, or a yellow ochre is very similar. And then I wanted a green, so I'm just mixing up some blue and some yellow. So whatever blue you happen to have. And a nice warm yellow. And the more yellow you put in it, the more of a limey green you'll get. And the more blue you put in it, the more of a kind of turquoisey green you'll get. So in this pan, I'm going to mix up, it's got a little bit of green in there and it's mixing with that that's already in there. So it's just got a bit of a muddy colour in there already, and that's okay. I want to mix up a kind of very pale peachy colour in there. So again, I'm going to go in with some pink, a little bit of a warm yellow, and then I'm going to add a lot of water into it. And then I've just got a little scrap of watercolour paper that I can test all of my colours on and check that that's as pale as I want it. And then the other colours are as bright as I want them. And that, I could even get a bit brighter. And that's looking quite a nice fresh palette. I'm quite liking that. So now it's just a case of deciding which areas to do what colour. So you'll see that as well as my watercolour paints, I've got a couple of jars of water, and I've taken to using them as a warm jar and a cool jar. So warm coloured paints I'll wash off in this jar, and cool coloured paints I'll wash off in that jar, and that kind of keeps them nice and separate. And then I've got a little bit of paper towel for drying my brush off, cleaning that off. I've got this brush here that I used for mixing the colours is a number 6, but I've got some smaller ones as well. So I've got this, which is a number 4, which should give me a little bit more detail, and then I've got a tiny little thin brush for doing very, very detailed bits. I've also got this, which is Bleed Proof White by Dr. P.H. Martins, which is a very strong white opaque paint that you can add in details over the top. So I may use a bit of that later on. If you've got some white gouache, you can use a similar thing, or a white pen like this one, works very similarly. So I've got this colour here, which is Permanent Rose with a little bit of yellow in it. Not too much yellow because I want it to still look nice and pink, and then I've added quite a bit of water because I want this to be nice and pale, because this is going to be my first layer. So I'm going to do this all around the border. So I'm just going to paint in that border all the way in between the two lines that I put in there. So I'm using a fairly large brush for this. I'm just trying to get that nice and smooth. I'm going back to join in this end while hopefully it's still wet. No, it's not, it's dried. Okay. Just to try and stop any solid lines. So I can go back and work on here now that this side is drying. Down to the bottom and join them at a nice point. Slightly smaller brush now, and I'm going to do my little birds, and I'm just going to paint the whole background area in because I'm going to give them detail later on. Then I'm going to go through the whole drawing and just fill in each of the areas in the same way, picking a different colour each time. So let's do the hearts now, and let's do them in this really bright crimson. If you want, you can turn your brush around and use the very tip like this to get a nice fine point on it. Now I'm going to paint the insides of my flowers with this dark red. So I think what I'm going to do is I want the whole of the flower to be nice and dark and red. It's much easier to paint the whole thing in first and then paint the little extra leaves on afterwards. So I'm going to do the whole thing in red and then just a little pointy bit on the side for where those extra petals come out. So a nice big deep cup shape for each flower. Now I'm going to take the finest brush that I've got, so the smallest brush that you can work with, to give you a nice fine line, and I'm going to use that to draw a line of the stems of my flowers. And then at the base of each flower, I'm going to do a little half circle. Now back to my slightly bigger brush, and I'm going to do some leaves. I'm going to add a little bit more water into that mix so they're a little bit lighter. And then for leaves, I can start with the point of my brush, push down and make it a little bit wider, and then pull up and get a nice point again, like that. I just need to go along the stem doing that. And if I want my flower petal leaf to be a little bit wider, you can just do it again next to the first one, make it a little bit wider. One there. A little bit too much on that one, so just with a dry brush, with a clean brush, I can lift some of that off. nice warm yellow as the little stamens of the flowers. Right, so I'm going to leave this to dry and then I'm going to come back and put a second layer on the top that's going to have more detail in. It's going to join bits together, it's going to do the wings of the birds and all of those kind of things. Right, so this is all dry now. So now the next thing to do is to just do the thing that I really love, which is to go in and add lots and lots of little details. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use the same colours that I've got on here. I might make some slightly darker versions of them. So this red here, I might add in a little bit more brown into that, just make it a little bit darker. But essentially I'm just layering the same colours over the tops of the ones that are already here. So I'm going to do hearts all the way around the outside in this little frame, and I'm going to mix up the pinks that I'm using. So yeah, so sometimes I'm going to be using more of a peachy pink, and sometimes I'm going to be using more of a red, and sometimes I'm going to be using more of a cool pink. So a little bit of each and just kind of move between all of them. And again, I'm using my very small, fine brush. And then right at the bottom here, 2 upside down hearts fit into this space a lot better than an upright one. So I'm just going to change the pattern there and keep going back round. And I'm just going to keep going until I meet up with myself at the top. Now my birds need a bit of something, so I put in a few little lines to try and make them look interesting, just to make them, just to divide them up into different sections. And then they need a wing. So I think I'm going to switch to a bigger brush for the wing. And I'm just going to add a little bit of dark brown and put in their feet. Okay, maybe a bit darker than that. While I've got that dark brown, I'm going to use it to connect these little bits to the flowers. I'm going to pick up some more of this green and add some little veins to all of the leaves. So I'm mixing up a very kind of dark red by mixing some of the red into the brown that we had before. If you want to make it even darker, you could add a little bit blue or a bit of green. And I'm going to use that to add little extra petals onto each of the flowers. So my design has 4 petals on the outside of each flower, and I'm going to use this little liner brush to draw them in. If you want to do the whole petal and not just the outside, then you can do that too. But I'm just going to do the outline. So I'm just going to keep going and adding little bits of detail into here. And you don't need to be as fiddly as me. And if you don't have a very small brush, then don't worry about trying to get as much detail as you can in here. In fact, if you wanted to do some of this with a pen, you could do that. That would look quite nice as well. Right, I think I'm just going to add a tiny little detail with this white. There's quite a lot on there. So this bit here I made a bit of a mistake on. I'm going to go in and do that again, this time in white. See if I can do it better this time. 2, 3, and the same over here. So there we are, there's our little Valentine's birds. I'm going to leave these to dry and then I'm going to show you how I attach them to the card. So lots of ways of attaching things to card. I've got some double-sided sticky tape. What you can do is just peel up the backing paper from a couple of the corners like this. And just push it back a little bit. And then I've left a bit of a border around my card, so there's just a couple of millimetres on each side. Make sure it's the right way up. So then the corners that aren't sticky, I can line them up where I want them to be. Make sure it's nicely aligned. Hold it down there. And then press the sticky corners down. And then when I pull the rest of the backing off, hopefully the front of the card is in exactly the right place and you get that little neat border all the way around. So here is my watercolour Valentine's card. If you give this a go, I'd love to see your version of it. So I will put the design sheet up on my website and I'll put a link to that in the description below so that if you want to follow along with this, then you can do. The usual caveats apply for those kind of things, so you can use them for anything you like for personal use, but not for commercial use, so please don't sell these designs. You can always post them to Instagram and tag me at Lou Rachel Davis. I love to see the work that you make and I like to share them in my stories if you're up for that. And I love any kind of feedback, so if you've got comments or questions you can leave them below or go and find me over on Instagram and have a chat there. So thanks very much for watching and I look forward to seeing you in another video really soon. Bye bye.